Hello and welcome to the News from the Real World video podcast. Today we come to you live from the Carnegie Mellon University Prop Shop. Today I'm joined by Matt Rohner, third-year technical director.
Hello.
Lauren, a third-year scenic designer.
Hello.
Dale, third-year technical director.
Good morning.
Kat, second-year stage and production manager.
Hi.
And myself, Taylor, I'm a third-year production manager. First we're going to talk about interactive theater. Matt?
Okay, starting things off this week. So this first article was a student-commented article. The title of it is Interactive Theater, 5 Rules of Play from an Audience Perspective. Comes to us from the Guardian Online. So the article was just addressing interactive theater or immersive theater, we call it in the States. And it was giving some guidelines as to what good interactive theater should be. So I want to just read the 5 guidelines for you now. The first is think outside the venue. This person writing basically saying, there's more to the venue than just a venue. You know, if you find a great warehouse, what is it about the warehouse? Some of the best interactive theater, according to them, has been in plain blank spaces. Second, justify your audience-actor ratio. A lot of times this type of theater puts a different responsibility in the audience's hand, and you want to make sure that there's, as a rule of thumb, more of an audience than there is performers. Enclose audiences, don't expose them. Again, this style of theater challenges the audience, puts them into different situations that they may not be used to being in. So you don't want to alienate them too bad. You just want to make them feel like they're part of the process without making them feel they're directly part of the process. The fourth thing is keep things simpler. Fifth, be consistent. You want to try to have a through line through it. You don't want to be too crazy. So 5 guidelines for interactive theater. And the question that I want to pose to you guys is, why just interactive theater? These 5 guidelines seem like pretty good rules of thumb for traditional storytelling as well.
I think that what the article was pointing out is that having these 5 rules for interactive theater is more important than it is for kind of traditional, I'm in a proscenium house theater, only because in that situation there are already rules. The audience sits in these seats, they watch this stage with these actors within this frame. Whereas with interactive theater, the audience comes in with knowing nothing and not knowing what to expect. And so to have some rules so that they kind of can adjust to that and accept that is important.
And the article also states, you know, it's actually pretty dangerous because it depends on the audience. It depends on the energy of the audience. I don't know if you can ever really make that consistent. I don't know if the audience energy is ever going to be the same consistency of the performer's energy.
That's the same way for regular proscenium shows, though. The feedback from the audience produces a different response every night.
The interaction, though, is not quite as crucial to the performance in the same way. You know, if you have a piece that's depending on audience members standing up and doing something or interacting with the actors, like a lot of the pieces that they talked about, then I think it really does affect the way that the performance goes in a way that it doesn't in a theater. One of the other things that I'm also interested in is that from a storytelling perspective, I think these rules really do make a difference. Just in terms of consistency in drawing the audience into the story, I think you really have to be careful about how you lead the audience through the narrative. Or else I think the meaning is completely lost and then you lose your audience. So that's another thing that I found quite interesting.
It's hard to regulate that
It
because
is.
for the audience members having a different narrative for themselves and their investment produces their experience, which happens in the proscenium show, but it's crucial with this.
Yeah.
So
But I wonder, so there's a lot of this happening right now, and probably the biggest thing on this side of the world right now is Sleep No More, right? And everyone that I talk to who goes to New York and sees Sleep No More comes back saying, I loved it. It was the best time I've had in a theater, which wasn't a theater. It was the storytelling was great. This was weird. This was cool. This was exciting. I was in it the whole time. I loved it. I want to go back again. And why do we love Sleep No More? Like, I think maybe because we don't look at these things in terms of traditional theater. Like, I think theater has become sort of like old hack. And like maybe if we like try to think more about how to use the venue, how to what are we acting on the audience, keep things simple, be consistent. Like these are all things that I think we sort of lose sight of because we've been telling the same stories in the proscenium stage for such a long time. And I would love to see these things applied to traditional theater. So people say, I saw a play in a theater and I loved it. It was exciting. I was in it the whole time. And I don't understand why we don't do that anymore.
I mean, I think people do that, though. I don't think, of course people love Sleep No More because it's something different and it's maybe something they've never experienced before, but it's the same, people go to see Oklahoma and leave the theater saying, that was awesome, that was so cool and exciting, and wow, that dance number was great. I mean, I think it's just different experiences, and the audience can still have the same reaction to both.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on. Move on to underweight models in Israel. Kat.
So this article was also a student pick. It's entitled, Underweight Models Banned in Israel to Fight Anorexia. New law forces women in ads to stay healthy, and faked images have to be identified too. It is from the Daily Mail, which is a British newspaper. So this article mentioned 3 things that the Israeli Knesset, which is kind of the equivalent of like British Parliament, just passed. The first is that models have to produce a medical report for 3 months prior to any shoot that they do, and their body mass index is not allowed to dip below 18.5. The third thing is that advertisers have to clearly mark images that have been digitally altered. So something that I found interesting is that the Israeli government has also stated in response to these laws that they are not going to be able to enforce them. And so I'm curious to see what people think. Are these laws really useful in any real sense? Or my take on it is that I think this is a great law. I totally agree with the reason behind it. But until it becomes more widespread with things like the movie industry, the TV industry, or any other entertainment, which have just as many, if not more, role models for young people as the modeling industry, that I don't know if it's really going to have any effect.
I still think this is a great step forward.
Yeah.
I think that this is kind of the first area that we're starting to see this movement come about. So I think that it's really important that we start to raise awareness about it. I think it's...
What about the model that naturally can't be 18.5,
Right.
have an 18.5 BMI, right? What about that model? Do they automatically, they don't get to work, so it's discrimination against that person?
That
because
is
they
an
don't get to work?
unhealthy weight, though. I mean...
That's
But-
probably natural for some people.
I mean, there are clearly some people that are
Sure.
naturally very skinny. And, go ahead, Matt.
No, I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, it does raise sort of the legality of it. So, like, is this discrimination against particular people? Is this censorship against, different marketing and ad firms? I don't know. Like I said, you can't enforce it, but still, just the fact that it's legality sort of puts it out there over everyone's head.
So it's not letting the market drive itself. So I'm comparing this to athletes who take steroids to improve their performance. And somewhere we got in our collective consciousness that skinny models are more attractive. And we've been driving it, but that is what I feel the consumer wants, and because that's what the companies are providing. So why are we legislating that?
I mean, you also have to look, though. The article mentioned that there was a model in 2006 that died of collapse from anorexia. So I think, there are safety issues going on.
Is this
here.
addressing the problem of anorexia, though? Or is this, I'm not sure that it is actually addressing that problem. It's just addressing the problem, not with models themselves, but with the youth of Israel saying, 12 to 20-year-old women are more likely to be anorexic because they see these super skinny models. I don't know if there's proof for that.
I agree with the concept, but it just gets really dicey when you start making regulations on what the public opinion should be. Everybody should think that bigger women are more attractive. Let's legislate that now to prevent. It's hard to
But
legislate.
how is that any different than legislating school lunches? Or here, you have to eat an apple instead of, 2 cups of
Because
French
there's
fries.
no discrimination against the
Exactly.
apple
Well,
and the orange, right? Nobody's going to say, the apple's not going to raise its hand and say, well, wait, hold on.
But, they're legislating health. They're not legislating...
I also think
Which
that
is why I kind of agree with Taylor in the sense that maybe regulating it to calculating BMI maybe isn't the right path.
I also think that, maybe we focus on education, get the message out there, talk to people about education, about eating, or about eating disorders. Maybe that's a better approach than regulating something that ultimately just kind of might disappear into the campaign anyway, so.
All right, well, speaking of legislation and regulation, we're going to talk a little bit about reality shows putting their crew too close to the cutting edge. So the title of the article is Reality Shows May Put Crews Too Close to the Cutting Edge. It is on the Los Angeles Times, and it's written by Richard Verrier and Scott Collins. So this article talks about Monica Martino, who is an executive producer on the show Bamazon, which sends out of work Alabama.
Do it, sell it.
Yeah, right. So I'm gonna really pump this show. Out of work Alabama contractors, I think, is what they are, and they go to the Amazon to find gold, to dig for gold. And what happened is Monica was on a boat late at night. The pilot of the boat was going way too fast, and they threw the whole crew over, and she got a concussion. She got hurt pretty bad, and then some of the other crew got hurt. And then the article goes on to say, well, then this happens everywhere, right? This is not just Bamazon. It's happening in every other, reality show, and that they sometimes turn down those really scary shows. Sort of, right? Somebody wanted to follow the Mexican drug cartel around, and they were like, "No, that's a bad idea." But I guarantee you, somebody reads this article and says, "I'd watch that show." So I don't know what we do. I mean, it's not. I don't think just a problem for reality shows. I think we do this here in theater too. I think we do it in movies. We put crews closer to the danger. Than we do the performers.
I mean, I think what this article was pointing out, though, is that movie crews that are exposed to danger are in a union, and there are rules, and they're compensated for it, and there's still regulations that can kind of protect them in some way, shape, or form. And what this is saying is that reality shows have become this huge industry that's kind of outside of the rest of the entertainment industry that isn't regulated as much. And so I think that was the problem.
So what is... who should regulate this? Who should step in? Should it be the producers or...
I found it interesting that the regulation is coming from an organization called the Fireman's Fund, which does insurance for reality shows. And that, the money talks, and that's where it's going to come down. They say they have 160 shows, reality TV-based shows that they do every year. They insure, but there's 50, where the drug cartel came from, there's 50 suggestions or 50 shows that are pitched to them that they don't insure. So that's where it is. If you don't have your insurance, you're not going to the Amazon. So the Fireman's Fund is in a place to kind of watchdog this and say, yeah, this is what we feel is safe and this is what is, and they're their own
and yet
organization.
They would still fund Amazon, and people still get hurt.
This also is a relatively new phenomenon, so I think we're still learning how to deal with it. But I think ultimately there does have to be some union to protect people that are working on reality TV. And whether that's OSHA that steps in or one of these other organizations, there has to be some rules in place so that we protect our crew members here.
Unfortunately, OSHA. I don't think is going to be like there was the example that the article talked about. I forget the specifics of it, but some crew member got hurt somewhere else, like on a boat or in a jungle or something, and OSHA couldn't write a citation because they don't technically work on the boat; they work in the studio, and so OSHA couldn't do anything. And it seems like entertainment in general, OSHA kind of doesn't really know how to handle it. Theater especially too. I mean, how often do we do something on stage that OSHA would shut down if it was in a factory or in an office, right? So I don't know what the answer to this is. Perhaps OSHA needs to come up with an entertainment clause of their big handbook. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the issue will be an issue for a while. Like you said, it's new. I don't know how we protect, people on movie sets, crews on movie sets. I know how we try to do it in theater, which is we just try to come up with the best plan to keep everybody safe. And I'm sure that that's what they've tried to do here, although it's a little bit harder to regulate because of the area that they're in and the work that's being done. Okay, so moving on, talking more about dangerous theater and dangerous entertainment. Let's talk about this High School Musical.
Okay, so there are two articles coming to us this week relating to high school theater and censorship. So the first one is from the Huffington Post, and it's about a Utah high school that has stopped production of All Shook Up, the Elvis musical, because of, and I quote, sexually suggestive Elvis songs. I'll go in and talk about the second article, and then we'll open this up. The second article comes to us from Playbill.com by Adam Hetrick. And this is about a high school in Ohio that has fired their director for staging Legally Blonde, the musical. So we have two different cases of censorship at the high school level for producing what is deemed risque theater. Is this surprising to you guys?
So my first thought on this was, Utah, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay. Ohio, what? Right? Why did I think that instantly? I thought that was very strange, and I thought I was kind of okay that Utah wouldn't let Elvis All Shook Up go on stage, but for some reason Ohio was more. That seemed crazier to me.
Both of these situations have the same, is that these shows had been produced and they were put on stage, and both of them had ran in front of a paying audience before they were shut down, which surprises me. There is a rehearsal process. Even here at CMU, Peter Cook or someone comes down it and they watch a rehearsal and they view the show before it's put in front of an audience, just so you know what you're putting your name on. So that's where both of these problems should have been solved.
Well, Legally
before it went
Blonde,
up.
Legally Blonde was approved for 8 months before it went into production. That's a huge problem. If the faculty of the school is not happy with the show choice,
Right.
then they need to shut it down immediately, not after these kids have already invested so much in
Yeah, it
performance.
seems as though there was more of a, with the Ohio, when the school fired the director of Legally Blonde, and I can't remember her name, it seems like that was more political than anything. They had just hired a new superintendent,
superintendent.
and he probably came in and said, we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing, when they had already done, Grease and other sexually suggestive
way
shows.
worse, yeah.
Grease
Yeah.
is super dirty.
So,
Well, the other
Is
thing
it
is
super
that this All Shook Up, the decision was actually reversed. The show is going on.
With
so
a
I
lot
will-
of edits.
Yeah, with
a
edits.
ton of edits.
Um,
And they let Legally Blonde continue,
right.
but then afterwards they fired this person.
I mean, is this concerning to us that we're shutting down these kinds of shows at this level? Is there material in these shows that's offensive enough to not let high school students deal
I mean,
with?
especially in a high school, I personally think that this is a case of adults being too protective and not kind of in touch with what actually goes on in high schools.
Yeah.
Like, Legally Blonde, I think part of one scene that they objected to was people sitting down in like a stuffy Harvard office and drinking champagne. And they
Yeah.
were saying that that was alcohol and but
But in Beauty
in
and the
high
Beast,
school, I mean, people drink in high school. We do not condone drinking in high school. However, it happens, and so seeing somebody sitting drinking a glass of champagne on stage is not going to change a high schooler how they think.
I mean, most of all, I just find it bizarre. I mean, I know that there's a high school here in Pittsburgh that did a version of Avenue Q last year.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen Avenue Q, my puppet friend here, he's not from Avenue Q, or maybe, I don't know. It's pretty out there. I mean, it's way more out there than Legally Blonde ever could dream of being. So
They also do edit that text down to
they
make
do
it.
edit the text, but it still
Yeah, it's
has
still
this,
questionable.
I'm going to find my purpose, and then what's the rest of the story? Right? He sings, I'm going to find my purpose, and then the show's over. So there has to be still some sort of, residue of what they're actually talking about, and I find that strange that high schools would regulate these two shows.
I think this
that
is pretty
specifically-
terrifying. These shows are pretty innocent. Elvis, really? I mean,
I don't
I'm
think.
the
That's
most
Utah.
conservative person here, and I was like, really, we're shutting this down? Elvis, like, that's
also,
pretty.
what 14-year-old girl in this high school has not seen the movie version of Legally Blonde? I mean, everyone's exposed to this already.
Well, so the show, so these two shows are shut down, and not shut down, they were able to continue, but the real issue came with parents. And so sometimes we'd like to tell our parents, go away.
True.
And Kat's going to talk about how one student did.
So, this article was about, it is entitled, Aubrey, Ireland, college student, wins restraining order against helicopter parents. It is from the Huffington Post. So, what happened was that this lovely girl, Aubrey, Ireland, is a 21-year-old music theater major from University of Cincinnati, and she filed a complaint with the court against her parents because, among other things, they would drive 600 miles from their hometown to University of Cincinnati on unannounced visits and would then accuse her of drug use, promiscuity, and mental illness. They installed keylogging software on her computer and her cell phone. And so as a response to this, the school actually had to hire
College
security
music
guards
theater major in
for
Cincinnati
school
is
productions. Thank you, Taylor.
Sorry about that.
For school productions to prevent the parents from attending them. And she eventually did cut off all contact with them, and so they stopped her tuition payments. And so she did win in court. There is a restraining order against her parents. They must stay no less than 500 feet away from her at all times. So,
Wait. They must stay more than 500 feet away.
no
Yeah.
less than 500 feet away from her.
They have to stay
Yes,
500
they have to
feet
stay
away.
500 feet away from her. Anyway.
600 is good. 499,
So,
no.
this is a huge, drastic example of what is kind of this new fad that people are talking about called helicopter parents, where parents get way too involved in their children's lives to childhood and through adolescence and up into adulthood. A few things that this article cited that I actually thought were very surprising and I would love to talk about are that there have been a couple of studies done on helicopter parents and kind of recent college grads. And these studies say that they found that a third of resumes within the study had been submitted by parents. A fifth of the recent college grads said that it was okay for their parents to contact their prospective employers.
Oh, yeah.
And a quarter of companies that they talked to had said that they had heard from parents talking about their children who had applied for positions. So I'm curious what you guys think about parents getting involved well past 18 years old when technically their responsibility ends.
That's scary.
I don't know, their responsibility doesn't end, but
No. But, I don't want my parents sending in a resume for me and then calling them saying, "Did you get my kid's resume? She's great. You should hire her." That's not something I want my parents to do.
although
Would you want your parents to
no,
do
but
that
I mean,
for
if my dad or my mom knew somebody that could get me a job and I sent them my resume and then they sent, right, that would
That's
be
using
fine.
a
That's completely
connection, though.
different.
That's
Yeah.
not like...
But in this case, no, I wouldn't want my dad to call me up and say, "Hey, I sent your resume to this guy. He wants to interview next Wednesday." No, that wouldn't be good, would it? No.
Doesn't seem like Aubrey's experience is that unusual. It might be a little heightened.
Yes.
But I know, hanging out with the undergrads, like their parents are involved and they call their mom, they show up for visits, and it seems like any teenager in the world would be like, "Oh, my parents are always in my business and they're always showing up, and just go away, mom and dad." Like,
It's not
I'm
like they
gonna-
put Aubrey in a cage and said, "We'll feed you 3 times a day," and it's not like they put a leash on her. I mean, they did sort of put an electronic leash on her, I guess, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem that out there. I guess I don't feel that bad for.
I don't
her.
feel that bad for her either.
The interesting part about this story is that it went to court, and a judge decided, yes, that the parents were inappropriate. So now we have a situation where legislator is determining how, or at least how not to parent our children. And I think that is the most disturbing part about the story. I mean, whether or not she was right, whether or not they were crazy, whether or not she was crazy, I mean, sure that, a friend of mine once said, parents just don't understand, right? So, but here we have, the courts deciding that, and that seems like, couldn't they just have, worked this out over,
Exactly.
a
Exactly.
night?
Well, so the case wasn't. So I think what you're talking about more would be some, a 16-year-old kind of filing. Because in that case, the parents are still legally responsible for their child. In this case, it was a civil stalking suit. So it had nothing to do with the fact that it was parents and child, and everything to do with how these two individuals were treating this other individual.
Right, but 18 is, maybe the new 13, you know what I mean? I'm 30 years old, right? And, my parents were still helping me out with stuff, helping me make decisions, 2-3 years ago before I came here. So, adolescence is getting fatter and fatter and fatter. So I would say the parents would have the right to treat her not like a 16-year-old, but would still have the right to be more responsible, to have more responsibility over her, especially because, they're paying the bills. My dad would be like, you're living under my house, you do what I'm doing. Maybe the same situation here.
Well, this is truly a bizarre
The
story.
first thing the parents did was ask for their tuition back. They're like, we want those 3 years of money back that we paid for your tuition, and that would be dicey.
And then the school gave her a full scholarship for her
They
senior
did.
year, which is strange. All right, before we move on to a highly controversial subject, more controversial than this one, I want to say we are live tweeting this show, so follow us at #NFTRW. All right, Matt's going to talk a little bit about some diversity.
Yeah, so this next article was written by Ming-Shu He. She is the co-artistic director for the Public Studio in Melbourne, Australia. And so this was written on her personal blog, mingshuhe.net. And it was sort of her New Year's resolution about diversity in the theaters that she would like to see. And just because it's in Australia, I think a lot of this really, really has a lot to do with similar things in America. So let's just go over it real quick. So she sets up her article or her blog post in 2 different sections. One, she's addressing issues of cultural identity. She purposely says she's not going to talk about gender and race. This is an issue of ethnics and culture in theater and in arts administration and arts management. And she brings up a couple reasons or a couple things that she would like to see happen in 2013, which she thinks she would solve this. So first, she is stressing the importance of more diverse personnel, right? We shouldn't just be run by, the white, by a white board, white artistic directors, white managing directors. We need to have more diverse people in our theater staffs. Something that can help with this, she says, is examining what roles can be filled. So what people are out there. She hints at a phenomenon which I'm not aware of happening a lot in America, though I'm sure it does, is that people hire ethnic consultants. So you might hire someone to come to your theater and consult about season selection, and then, thanks a lot. Mm-hmm. She was saying, we need to look at what we're doing with these consultants and maybe see if there's a bigger job for them in our houses. She stresses the importance of diversity to future generations, teaching our children about diversity in the theater and in the arts in general. And also just probably the most important thing is a peer examination. This isn't just going to happen from above. It probably will happen eventually from up below, but she says that probably the most action is going to happen at the middle among everyone else. Everyone looking at other people's stuff and what they were doing. So just by looking at a quick look at the panel here, what do you guys think about diversity? Is diversity... No, let's just talk about diversity. What can we do to make our theaters more diverse?
I think what struck me the most about this article is her concern for making it available to future generations.
Yeah.
Opening it up, making an arts career viable for migrants and for, international participants, that kind of thing. So I think that's where it starts, is that we have to shift our mindset about who we want to be creating the art.
Yeah, I don't think we can assign blame. I think we can try, but assigning blame felt like that was a big part of this article, was who are we blaming for this? And for the lack of diversity in the arts management, arts leadership world. It's very difficult, and I don't want to take that blame on, and I don't think anybody else does. The only thing that we can do is educate, like we're educating, models, we're educating young children not to be anorexic, we just need to educate the future generation to say this is a possibility, something you could do. I just don't know if there's many, diverse groups that want to do this. I don't know. Maybe.
It's interesting how she titled the article. It says we're not done talking about diversity. I know I've heard it said we're in a post-racial America. We're past it. We've got equality for all. We're past that, but a brilliant point is that we're not. And it has to be actively pursued, and it's in leadership. So I'll use my church as an example because they model this well. My church is in the north side. We have black folks and white folks. But we made an intentional point, we are not going to have an all-white leadership. And so they have gone out and sought black leaders who can be pastors and be on our board. Because your leadership needs to look like your constituency. In Congress, not doing it, and a lot of these arts production companies, they have maybe a diverse body, but it's not in leadership, and that has to be actively pursued. And I'll quote the Rooney Rule, which is in the NFL, which there's not a lot of African-American head coaches. So they made a rule that if you're applying for a head coaching position, you have to interview a minority coach, and because of that, we have a lot more. Coach Tomlin was part of that rule, then he got the job, and so it's an intentional, active pursuit of this.
And what's I find the most interesting is sort of the ramifications of that, right? So I don't know how it affects your congregation, but so her sort of thinking is that if we make the personnel above us diverse, it'll trickle down, and the stories we start telling on stage won't be stories like, how can we make this story look like someone else's story, or how can we put you in our shoes? Mm-hmm. Like, those questions will disappear.
Right.
Like, the programming will change because the leadership will change, and it'll be about sort of a universality, which is very promising and very interesting.
The quote that she had about that I wrote down because I kind of loved it was that we live in a monocultured, multiracial society, not a multicultural one. So, like, that kind of goes along with, sure, we can, like, try to change a play in a way that makes it appeal to a broader array of people, maybe, but it still might come from, white culture, and maybe that's something that we
Right.
need to think more about.
Yep. Like this is their story, but no, this is our story.
Right.
Yeah.
Was a
Yeah.
phrase she used. So.
So before we move on to our next article, we have a very special guest. Dale, we'll talk about Star Wars.
Yes, so George Lucas is the creator of Star Wars, as we all know, and he's made 6 films. He's getting on in years, and so he has agreed to sell his Lucas Arts production company, which owns the rights and the production management of Star Wars, to this little company in Orlando called Disney, which is now going to manage the Star Wars franchise, and they've already planned the release of the next film. It'll be in 2015, and it's been a buzz up and down the interwebs, and we brought in our specialist,
That's me.
Jacob Rothermel,
Resident
to,
Star Wars nerd.
to talk about this. So I'll get us going, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, do it.
I grew up as a Star Wars fan, a lot of us did, and a lot
Yep.
of us are very nervous about what Disney is going to do to our beloved franchise. Lucas has done a lot to ruin it himself in the last decade. But what is Disney? Are we going to have... What are they going to do? What are they going to do to it? Why is this scary, or why is this good?
Well, it's when I first heard that Disney was taking over the reins of this, I had a lot of mixed feelings, like a lot of people did. And but the more I've reflected on it, the more I've talked about it with other people, and the more that news has been following this, the less I think that people are nervous about Disney, because you look at what Disney did to Marvel and all the superhero movies, the Avengers and stuff like that, like were really not only a good superhero movie or a comic book movie, but a really good movie, and like really good writing and character and dialogue and all that stuff that's in there to make a really compelling, I think, story. I mean, it's still about a comic book, but it's I think a really good compelling story, and part of that is the writing and the support that it all gets. Joss Whedon wrote that, and really, because he's a nerd himself, was very invested in this. And I think that with that same kind of feeling and direction, that Disney can do really well. I mean, you can argue too that Star Wars has nowhere to go but up after the prequels, and I beloved though it is, will admit that most of those prequels blew pretty hard. But I think Episode 4, Star Wars: A New Hope, the very first movie was, that was good. It was great. It's changed. I mean, compared to the other ones that came after, it was probably the weakest of the original trilogy. And part of the reason why I think that Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were so much stronger films is because Lucas handed them off and let other people direct them and let other people tell those stories. And I think that the same phenomenon is going to happen here. He still has a creative hold on some of those things, but I think because other people are going to take his idea, because Lucas has really good ideas, he's just really bad in practice.
Right, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from this that we can get as theater practitioners, right? So we talked last week about staging The Invisible Man. We've talked about Samuel Beckett. A lot of times there's even an article on the Green Page about the rights for Superman being transferred solely to Warner Brothers now. This, I think, is a good example of what happens when a creator lets go of their thing. When it becomes bigger than themselves, and they're giving it to other people who know how to tell these stories, who know what to do with it. Like, could you imagine if Shakespeare, like, if we had, like, Shakespeare's great-great-great-great-grandkids, like, centering Shakespeare right now? Like, God, people would hate Shakespeare. It would be the worst. And I'm...
More people would hate Shakespeare.
Right. Yeah, good. So, like, I think this is great because, let go of your creation, George Lucas. Let other people take care of it.
Well, but the funny thing is that he's let it go as on a personal level, but the reason that he gave it to Disney was because they would be able to protect the integrity of his work and his ideas more fully than he could, just because they're so much bigger and so much more powerful. And so really, it's the opposite of what you just said. He's handing it over so that it doesn't change in a way that he doesn't want it to.
Yeah, but he's handed it off to people that he trusts to continue his work. That's the difference, I think. I still think Disney is evil. They're the empire.
Without
in
a
this
doubt,
metaphor.
I mean.
Yeah.
They're evil, but they can save Star Wars.
And they can tell a good story.
Yeah.
We learned that.
And they
before.
have the resources at their disposal to do well by something that is already such a huge cultural icon of dare I say, the world, and just about every country out there on this planet. So I think that it can be really served well. I mean, I'm still gonna cross my fingers and grit my teeth and hold back a little bit. But I mean, the only person that I think this article and this video confirmed as one of the treatments, the screenwriters is I can't remember his name, but the guy who wrote Toy Story 3 and a couple other things.
Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah. So there's talented people with established careers and are already behind this.
I mean, they've chosen a director already.
J.J. Abrams.
Yeah,
J.J.
J.J.
Abrams,
Abrams,
yeah.
who has
Right.
reinvented things very successfully in the past decade or so already. So I think it's
So I'm always resistant to these kind of things, but you think about what he's done with Star Wars in the last 20 years, with Star Wars Legos and Star Wars cereal and Star Wars pajamas. Like, it's already been Disney-fied as much as he can do.
yeah,
So it
Disney
seemed like
can't do worse.
I was angry at first, but it seems like a logical progression.
I guess we'll
because-
just have to wait for Star Wars Land at Disney World.
I'll be
now,
in line.
right?
Well, that's
I will.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the scariest thing, right? Is not so much all the merchandise, because you said that's going to happen, but like we're gonna take our kids to Disneyland, and we're gonna want to see Mickey, and we run into Jar Jar Binks. Like,
Yeah,
that's
that's
gonna
going
be
to happen.
that's
Alright, so
probably
we'll,
the worst.
We'll give Jake the last word. Thank you for joining us. Do you have any last words to say?
I mean, I could do a cliche, may the force be with you, but I got nothing.
Live
All
long.
right.
Great.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, man.
Okay, let's move on to the next article.
All right, so talking about Arduino.
Hold on.
Oh, we got a fade. Should I get up?
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
All right.
Everyone else stay frozen. We'll figure that out. Okay, so
Totally screwed up that fade in.
You still
We didn't.
Blew it.
Yeah, look at that.
Goodbye, Jacob.
live long and prosper.
Good to see you. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about some Arduino.
Talking about Arduino, something I'm very excited to talk about. The title of this article is "Go Bionic" with these wearable Arduino projects. Earl Enerson wrote this from Wired.com. This was a student pick, 11 comments, and he was just introducing us to different things that people have done with the LilyPad Arduino microcontroller. Arduino is a prototyping platform for embedded electronics. It's sort of the backbone of the open source do-it-yourself hardware movement, and LilyPad is a specific circuit board that you can sew into clothing, and when you use conductive thread, you can do a couple different things. So this article is showing off some of those things. A couple of the cool things that I thought, some of these things were a little superfluous, but the one thing, like you can make a glove that when you move your fingers, it makes a beat. Another thing, so someone made a sweatshirt that when they moved on their bicycle, turn signal would show whether they were turning right or turning left. And one of the coolest things I thought was there was a superhero design contest, and they showed this costume of this one superhero design where it was this guy and he had all sorts of lights on him, and when he moved his hands, he could charge his hands and flash a light bulb, and it was pretty cool. There was a lot of naysayers in the comments. A lot of students saying there's no use for this in theater. They should just use CGI instead. Which I want to say, we're in theater, right? You don't use CGI. And I think there's abundant uses of this type of technology in theater. I mean, costume design immediately comes to mind, but also like media, the sound design implications of this, light design implications of this, I think are just really abundant and really great. And I'm really excited that I hope we start seeing things. What do you guys think? LilyPad, Arduino, electronics on
Is it
stage?
expensive? Is it really, really expensive?
No.
You can, I think it's about $70 you can get rolling on it. It's open source software. It's easy to program. And we had a class on it, and they're $70 will get you started on a little LilyPad with a battery pack. It's all about application. Like, it's so open.
Yeah.
They just have to have a great idea, and it can do that. There's just so many tools, and at CMU I've learned all these tools and resources. Once you have them, it's your job to apply them. So I was really disappointed with the commenters who said, this is clever, but I don't see any application for it. Well, no, that's your job.
That's insanely cool, though. I mean, this dress that I don't know if you saw the dress, but it has photography panels embedded in it with LEDs behind it, and it actually creates an image when the lights go down. That's insanely cool, and costume designers would have a field day with this technology, I think.
I think it also shows that if this stuff does start getting used in theater, which I hope it does, that there's already kind of a, I don't want to say clash, but like departments already having to cooperate more and more as technology changes. And I think that with the addition of this, departments are just going to have to be all over each other all the time, which is great because then they have to cooperate together and the product might be just so much better.
So there'll be an Arduino department that deals specifically
Yeah.
with this, maybe, or an effects department.
I think it will be a way of different departments to talk about capabilities and potential. So if a designer brings an idea to the table and they say, I want to do this, can we do this? And instead of like really banging our heads against the wall, we can say, oh, wait a minute, there's this thing. Let's, excuse me. Let's see if we can use this instead. And then people will know what these capabilities are.
Just to educate that this is a tool that you can use
Yeah.
to solve these
I
problems.
also think it has some great practical applications. You know, the breathalyzer and the bike signal turn jacket,
Yeah.
the turn signal jacket, that's insanely cool. And probably has safety applications as well.
Until it gets it wrong.
Until it gets
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to our last article of the day, we talked a little bit about arts reformation.
So this is an article that comes to us from the Pink Line Project. And this is a speech that Ben Cameron, who is on the board of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, gave at a talk for the Metropolitan Atlanta Arts Fund. And in the speech, Ben Cameron suggests that we are currently in the middle of an arts reformation. And what he means by that is that we're at this point where we don't necessarily need a performer to stand between us and the art. Much like during the real Reformation, there was this sense that we didn't need intermediation in communication between God and the individual. So he's saying that we are in this period of time where there's a movement for arts participation, for greater audience interaction in the theater, and that we need to react to that. What do you guys think about this article?
So a lot of this is just the power of the internet
Yeah.
and how 10 years ago I couldn't make my own film because I didn't have the technology. Now I can make my own films all day long. So that is part of. I am going to disagree a little bit. I go to the art museum to see painters who are greater than I, and I go to the opera to see people that can sing better than I, and I go to the ballet, etc., etc. So art performed at a high. There's a lot more user ability. But I still think there's always be a place for art at a high level of performance art. If you go to a ballet and you go to the symphony, he actually said the symphony model is ending, but I can't produce a symphony. I enjoy that process. So I don't think it's going away.
I think that his point wasn't necessarily that symphony is a dying art and we should get rid of the symphony. I think his argument was that we have to start thinking about what we should or what we can change about how we do things to start to change how we think about art and how we think about theater. So I think the example of the symphony, he said the symphony orchestra is the monastery of today. Monasteries still exist now. They're not as, held up on such a pedestal as they were in 1300.
I hope that's not true, though. I mean, yeah, but with the symphony, maybe it is a dying art because the people that go to see it are dying, which is like, okay, but we still use them in movies, and we still use them in musicals, and there's still a purpose for that, and there's still a purpose for a lot of the art that we do that's, possibly outdated or dated in certain ways. I don't know if I necessarily agree with them that we're in the middle of some sort of change.
But I think there's an example, I don't remember where it was, but of a symphony that has these special performances that they do every once in a while, where they invite what he called avocational musicians to come and perform with the professional musicians on stage and perform these big works, and that kind of perpetuates a whole different kind of loyalty to people that may never have gone to see a symphony in their life. So I think it's just, we have to find ways to get these people more involved, and maybe, stepping down off the pedestal of the symphony as this great art form is part of a way to do that.
Right, and I think that is really the crisis that he's speaking to, is that these things still exist, but there's 10 different things we can replace them with, right? So, no doubt we're going to see a ballet and we're going to feel moved, but, I can just sit at home. And I love doing that, too. And so does billions of people, because they have the internet, because they have this, because they have TiVo. TiVo? No. Because they have everything else. And so he's saying we're in a crisis. Something needs to change, right? So, going back to his example, which I think is a pretty solid metaphor, right? So, people went to church to, hear the gospel. And then when the printing press happened, they didn't have to go to church anymore because they could do it at home. So now I think what he's saying is, how do we get people in our theaters or in our symphony halls, in our, museums, and not at home? And I think we do need to reform.
He said that there's a difference between a theater that's goal is to produce great plays and a theater whose goal is to connect audiences with great plays. That we have to be conscious of how we are connecting and interacting with our audience, or else I think we are going to be a monastery.
We'll be producing great plays with nobody
Exactly.
to watch it.
And no one to fund them, and that's what's really going to happen is the great plays are just going to be on a shelf somewhere, and we're going to watch.
So I think
Friends on
we
Netflix.
need to produce our work with our audience in mind, and I think that's something that's easy to forget when we are, rather detached from them in our work.
So the answer is Arduino.
Yeah, for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah.
Put cool
LEDs
stuff on
everywhere.
stage.
LEDs in the instruments, they light up when they hit certain
Death of a
notes.
salesman with Arduino.
And healthy models with helicopter parents.
Death of Arduino.
and
That's
some
okay.
diversity.
All right, well, I think that about wraps us up for today. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to thank John Ward for letting us use his prop shop. See you next time.
I miss Jake.
Yeah. Hey,
I sound like Kermit on film, by the way. I was watching it the other day. I was like, I have Kermit arms. I've got long arms.
Are we recording?
No.
okay.
Again.
Good, I'm glad you got that.